I hope it doesn't sound arrogant when I say that I am the greatest man in the world.
Beware spoilers. Spoiler alert. This episode drops a lot of bombshells in terms of surprises. Or it would have done if they hadn't all been obvious from almost the start of the series. Sadly, Amazon got the fuses so wrong on those bombshells that most fizzled like duds back in episodes 1 and 2. So right down to the highlights. What's the good and the bad? The good. They maybe redeemed the Galadriel torture and genocide scene. A little. Maybe. Were they trying to sell the idea that Sauron was corrupting Galadriel all along, and that was the cause of her behaviour? I honestly don't know. If Sauron was corrupting her, and spoiler, we now have it confirmed that Halbrand was indeed Sauron. Imagine my shock, as if it was ever in doubt. The idea that Sauron can corrupt people is not that bad an idea. The One Ring is supposed to contain some of his power, so it would maybe follow that he could do the same in person. But if Sauron was corrupting Galadriel, then why was she still acting like a psychopath before she ever met him? Was he still corrupting her then, when she was a continent away, and despite never having met her? I have no idea. Is it unrelated to proximity? Can he do it to anyone? Can he do it to everyone all at once? What are the stakes? Was he corrupting her before she even met him? So what's in the good? They at least have an alternative reading of their story that's not pro-genocide and weirdly fascist. And I think Hanlon's razor applies. Never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained by stupidity. And from this latest episode, I think the latter is a genuinely valid option. So was Galadriel being controlled, or is she just fascistic? In truth, they haven't really sold either concept. I could maybe liken it to an archery range with 2 targets set up. An Amazon steps up and fires an arrow that goes between the 2 targets. Both targets were missed by varying amounts, but the shot was so bad, I'm not even sure what target the Amazon was aiming at. Or maybe it's more like the story of Monkey Jesus. If you don't know that story, it's terrible and tragic and funny all at the same time. It involves a painting called Behold the Man in the Sanctuary of Mercy Church in Borja, Zaragoza in Spain. It's a fresco painted circa 1930 by the Spanish painter Elias Garcia Martinez, depicting Jesus crowned with thorns. The story goes that the painting deteriorated over time, and its current fame derives from an attempt to restore the fresco by one Cecilia Jimenez, a local elderly parishioner and an untrained amateur artist, in the year 2012, resulting in the picture looking like this. That's right, she tried to improve it, and it ended up looking like that. Regular commenter English Lady came back in the YouTube comments to say she doubted the interpretation of the orcs as the Charlottesville protesters, saying, "I would not put it past them," meaning Amazon, "but I honestly think that they lack the skill as writers to be this subtle. If they were trying to reference that, it would be a lot more blatant and on the nose." And at this point, I'm not sure. She may be right. Casting Sophia Non-Vete in the most expensive TV series in history, considering this is her 3rd ever acting role, certainly doesn't shriek of competence. And I repeat, her 2nd role was in a children's TV game show called Swashbuckle from 2019, where she played the character of Captain Hey-Ho.
Right, I am so hungry for my seafood a la slurp. Is it ready yet, cook?
I'm just about to start making it.
So on one hand, it's good that they added an alternative, non-fascist reading of the plot. On the bad, the different reading doesn't really work either, and they also badly butchered Tolkien's story. Still, I'm going to give them a higher grade for this episode at least, for trying to mend some of the horrendous damage from episodes 6 and 7. The show opens on totally not Gandalf as he travels alone through a forest. He notices a small figure watching him and darting between the trees. He follows them, and at first it appears to be Nori Brandyfoot, but it isn't. It's instead one of the 3 mystery women that have been tracking not Gandalf, these being the Dweller, the Ascetic and the Nomad, and it seems the Dweller can shapeshift. The three bow to him and hail him as their Lord Sauron, and I don't believe it for a second. My immediate thought was, just because the three women said it, it doesn't make them correct, and it could be a case of mistaken identity. I didn't buy it because Halbrand is now wending his way to Eriador, where the rings are forged in the story, just as Celebrimbor is there with some mithril, desperately wanting to forge something. We then cut to Galadriel and Halbrand as they race to Eriador to try and save his life. And Galadriel says that they've been travelling for 6 days. Now, as previously stated, that's a journey as the crow flies of about 2,200 kilometres, and it all happened off camera again. That's 366 kilometres a day, 15 kilometres an hour for 6 days straight, which is barely doable. But that doesn't give the horses time to rest, drink or eat. The horses would probably die of exhaustion. For an average horse, by my previous calculations, that's a lot shorter than the 1 to 2 months it maybe should have taken. Maybe the horses are magic. Magic is a hell of a lazy get out of jail free card, and unless its boundaries are well defined, there's kind of no stakes left to the story after you use it. Meanwhile, the elves are losing hope. They do not have enough mithril to save themselves. So the elven healers treat Halbrand, and then Halbrand goes to see Celebrimbor, and the writers fully give the game away. Halbrand seems to be walking just fine now, and I have no idea how much time is supposed to have elapsed. Celebrimbor already has 3 gemstones set out on the table, so it's obvious where they're going with this. These are the stones of the 3 elven rings: Narya, the ring of fire, Nenya, the ring of adamant, and Vilya, the ring of air. Celebrimbor cannot see a way to make it work with so little mithril. Halbrand suggests alloying the mithril to amplify its effect, adding, "Consider it a gift." And they've fully given the game away, because one of Sauron's names was Anatar, which translates as the Lord of Gifts. Foreshadowing is one thing, but you do have to be a bit subtle with it, or you'll just give the game away on page 1.
Could you make me a cup of tea, please, Stephanie?
It's Rings of Power time again, so spoilers. Where did I leave it? I'm going to go right in, give you the meat and give it to you raw, because from the last video I did, and the time when people tuned out, it appears that the YouTube audience seemed to have attention deficit disorder. So challenge accepted. While I love and respect each highly valued member of my audience, it appears I'm going to have to bring more razzmatazz for all of you quick shots with no staying power.
Now you want to get nuts? Come on, let's get nuts.
Okay, you asked for it. So when I left the show, we were with the elves. Halbrand had just given the idea to Celebrimbor to alloy the mithril, saying, "Consider it a gift." And the showrunners had just blown the surprise, because one of Sauron's alternate names was Anatar, the gift giver in Elvish, or should I say they blew it again, because I looked back at my reviews and I started calling Halbrand Sauron in episode 3, which I would say with the show being very predictable if I hadn't started calling the stranger Gandalf in episode 1, about 15 seconds after the first time I saw him. I'm just saying, it kind of ruined the big reveal in episode 8. The elven smiths are trying to decide how best to use the mithril to save themselves, and Celebrimbor has a cunning plan.
It's a cunning plan, actually.
It's the one he got from Sauron. Sorry, Halbrand. Not Sauron, definitely not Sauron. The Elven King says that since the Mountain of Fire's eruption, the blight affecting their people has quickened. So he knows about Mordor now, and when did he learn that? Did Galadriel tell him off camera? I'm getting so bored of this. It feels like more of the story happens off camera than on it. But Celebrimbor already has his solution, to alloy the mithril. He says, "It was only in speaking with the Southlander that I realised. His suggestions were the key that unlocked the dam. We're on the cusp of crafting a new kind of power, not of strength, but of spirit. Not of the flesh, but over flesh. This is a power of the unseen world." And Galadriel smells a rat. "Those words of power over flesh," she says, "where did you hear them? Was Halbrand with you?" And she starts to sense that something is wrong with Sauron. Sorry, Halbrand. And what is that line? A key that unlocked the dam. It's hardly a well-used phrase. It's a horrible mixed metaphor ordinarily. Normally the phrase would be the key that opened the lock, or what broke the dam. And I'm not sure if this line is clever or idiotic, because in this series, a key, the Keyblade, did unlock a dam. The dam that broke in episode 6 and created Mount Doom. So are the writers clever or are they morons? I'm not sure. Comment below. So the elves set about working the mithril, and I'm not sure how they're going to work something that hard. How did the dwarves even mine it? Surely they're going to need some very special tools in order to do that. Or they can just hit it with a chisel, apparently. In their defence, maybe the ore is softer than refined mithril. Meanwhile, Galadriel asks for records to be brought to her about the lineage of the kings of the Southlands. She's grown suspicious of definitely not Sauron. Galadriel is given records stating that the last king of the Southlands died 1,000 years ago, leaving no heirs, and she confronts Halbrand with this information. He goes full mask off. She asks what his name is, and he says he's been around for a very long time and he's had a lot of names. She then tries to stab him with a knife. What follows seems to take place in Galadriel's head, as Sauron uses images to try and woo her to his side. And they have done so much damage to Lord of the Rings with these scenes. Sauron seems to have genuine love and affection for her. He reminds her how she said it didn't matter what he'd done in the past, but she's changed her mind now that she knows he's Sauron, so she was lying when she said that. You've made Galadriel into a liar, and Sauron now has less menace and mystique than Dr. Claw from Inspector Gadget. Sauron then says the following to Galadriel.
You would make me a tyrant.
I would make you a queen. Fair as the sea and the sun. Stronger than the foundations of the earth.
And how dare you, Amazon? How dare you get your grubby hands on that? That speech is not yours to ruin. Galadriel's speech in Lord of the Rings did not need an origin story. It never needed you to fix it. It was perfect as it was. I'm not even sure that Peter Jackson should have changed it. But he did change it. Here's the text from Lord of the Rings, the Tolkien version. The context is in Lothlorien when Frodo offers Galadriel the ring. Galadriel says, "And now at last it comes. You will give me the ring freely. In place of the Dark Lord, you will set up a queen, and I shall not be dark, but beautiful and terrible as the morning and the night, fair as the sea and the sun, and the snow upon the mountain, dreadful as the storm and the lightning, stronger than the foundations of the earth. All shall love me in despair." She lifted up her hand, and from the ring that she wore there issued a great light that illuminated her alone and left all else dark. She stood before Frodo, seeming now tall beyond measurement and beautiful beyond enduring, terrible and worshipful. Then she let her hand fall, and the light faded, and suddenly she laughed again, and lo, she was shrunken, a slender elf woman clad in simple white, whose gentle voice was soft and sad. "I passed the test," she said. "I will diminish and go into the west and remain Galadriel." It's hard to know what Tolkien was thinking when he wrote this, but "All shall love me in despair" reminds me of the poem Ozymandias by Percy Shelley. If you don't know it, it goes, "I met a traveller from an antique land, who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed, and on the pedestal these words appear, 'My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, in despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away.'" So maybe Tolkien was trying to evoke these feelings of time bringing everything to ruin, from a humble man to a great despot, the ambitions of men fading into dust. In the Peter Jackson films, he made Galadriel darker, and here's his version of the same speech.
In place of a dark lord, you would have a queen! Not dark, but beautiful and terrible as the dawn! Treacherous as the sea! Stronger than the foundations of the earth! All shall love me and stand!
So Peter Jackson added, treacherous as the sea. So now Galadriel is treacherous in this imagined form. The laughter has also been removed. In his version, she's deadly serious. She's far more tempted than in Tolkien's version. And now Amazon have made her darker again. Amazon retconned it, so when she gave her speech in Lord of the Rings, she was quoting Sauron. This is vandalism. And maybe she should have taken him up on it. Maybe she could have prevented a lot of suffering by doing so. Or maybe she knew that he'd just end up corrupting her. During these scenes, Sauron reveals that none of this was planned on his part. He got taken to where the rings were being made entirely by accident. He met Galadriel by accident. He wanted to stay in Numenor. Showrunners, what have you done? You now expect the audience to believe that Galadriel was searching for Sauron for untold centuries, went for an unfeasible swim in the ocean, and in the expanse of the empty ocean happened to find a raft. And on that raft was the man that she'd been searching for all that time. This is untenable. You've done all that, and now, if anything, the forging of the One Ring is Galadriel's fault. The only way that I could defend that scene was to think that maybe, just maybe, Sauron had somehow contrived their meeting. That there was a diabolical mastermind behind it all. But no, you've shut the door on even that now. Sauron has been reduced to a love-drunk bumbler, creating evil by accident. Galadriel's speech in Lord of the Rings did not need an origin story. Sauron didn't need an origin story, neither did Mithril or Mount Doom. What is this obsession with retconning and origin stories that Hollywood has? It reminds me of the film Solo, where his name needed an origin story. Han Solo needed an origin story. His ship needed an origin story. Some things it's fine to just leave as mysteries. I would love to see anyone who claims to like this series justify that. Go on, the comment section is right below. I dare you, try it.
Could you make me a cup of tea, please, Stephanie?
Rings of Power review, so there will be spoilers. And the first one of them, the more you think about this show, the worse it gets. So Galadriel refuses Sauron's offer to join him, and the next thing she knows, she's underwater drowning in another vision scene. Back at the moment when Sauron saved her in the ocean, only this time he's not saving her. She's then fished out of the river by Elrond, and she then almost stabs him. Is there anybody left in this series that she hasn't threatened to stab at this point? She thinks Elrond may be Sauron. He wins her over by telling her how they met. And the first thing Galadriel wants to know is where Celebrimbor is. And my question is, why? The audience knows the importance of the rings, but Galadriel doesn't. And this makes no sense whatsoever. Why was her first question not, where is Halbrand? Why did she not say, Elrond, where is Halbrand? I'm pretty sure I've been fooled and he's rarely Sauron. Because we find out at the end of the episode that Sauron seems to have walked all the way back to Mordor. Maybe he teleported. Maybe it's magic because it's all off camera again. But Sauron allegedly walked the 2,200 kilometres back to Mordor. And why do they keep on doing this to me? This series has no grasp of time and space. If Sauron managed a walking speed of 4 kilometres an hour and walked 24 hours a day, he'd maybe make it back to Mordor in about 23 days. In reality, he'd be walking for months. She didn't even ask what time it was when she woke up in the river. Sauron might have even not managed to leave yet. He may just have left. If you get on horses, you can probably catch him. Instead, Galadriel and Elrond go to Celebrimbor's tower, and Elrond asks her, where is Halbrand? Galadriel says, he's gone. and I doubt he'll return. He's gone? What do you mean he's gone? How do you know he's gone? You aren't even going to ask around and find out if anyone saw him leave. Sauron could still be there as far as you know. You could still catch him. He may have only just left. You even know what direction he's probably going in. Elrond asks her what happened by that stream, and she doesn't tell him. She says he should trust her instead, and it's this, isn't it?
What will they do when you tell them that you are my ally? When you tell them that Sauron lives because of you?
She's thinking of herself, isn't she? She's thinking what people will say about her when they know that she helped Sauron. How can the writers get the concept of heroism this wrong? The world is going to be plunged into 3,000 years of darkness and death because Galadriel cared more about her reputation than stopping Sauron. So she's not telling anyone. And she's not going after him. She's just going to stay in the tower and make some jewellery instead with a process that she already suspects is tainted. So what follows is a truly laughable scene on metallurgy written by people who have no idea what metallurgy is. They decide on making 3 rings, which is handy because they've had those 3 gems sat on the table all episode. They say 3 because 1 will corrupt, 2 will divide, but with 3 there is balance. 3 is balance, huh? Then why were the elves going to make 1 crown earlier this episode? Celebrimbor says the purity of the lesser ores in the alloy is crucial. He needs gold and silver of the most exquisite quality, and he needs to melt Galadriel's dagger to make the rings. He says that true creation requires sacrifice. So I guess earlier in the episode, the elves were just going to forge a +1 crown of corruption. And that dagger is clearly not an ore. An ore is a naturally occurring solid material from which a metal or minerals can be extracted. Ores are not pure. They're an unpurified metal-bearing mineral or rock. Could you not have got a consultant for this part? Somebody that actually knew what the hell they were talking about? Didn't you even do the most scant research? And we just get deeper and deeper into the nonsense, as Celebrimbor says that they need gold and silver of the purest quality, so they have to use Galadriel's dagger. But what precisely would make the gold and silver from the elves' continent purer? Is it just magic again? And then they just take the whole dagger and throw it into a furnace and melt it, and it just so happens the dagger contains the perfect quantities required for the melt. They throw the whole thing in, so even the blade, which logically must be made of steel, right? You can't have the blade made of silver, surely. Silver's pretty soft. You wouldn't get very far making a blade out of pure silver. Maybe it's magic again. The blade has pearls in it. In what way is that pure? You seem to have pearls and steel in your melt. You got what looks like 2 litres of liquid metal from that one small dagger. So then they add the mithril, and then they just throw in the unpurified ore. What, with bits of rock in it? What definition of pure are you using? Writers, you don't know what ore means, do you? For someone who has any knowledge of chemistry or metallurgy, this is painful to watch. And this gets so much worse when you realise that the forging of the rings in the Tolkien literature takes about 100 years. They start in year 1500 of the Second Age. The 3 rings of the elves are made next in 1590, and the 1 ring is made by Sauron in 1600. The elven rings are supposed to be made last, so either the writers have butchered the source material again, or Sauron and the elves made the other 16 rings for the dwarves and men off camera, and at this stage I cannot rule out either of those possibilities. So the elves pour the alloy into moulds to make 3 blocks to make the rings out of. And how the hell did you get 2 gold rings and 1 silver ring from the same pot of molten metal? You could maybe get a golden exterior using acid to remove the other surface metals. For the silver, maybe the elves have electroplating. Maybe it's magic. Maybe it's complete effing nonsense. Meanwhile, Elrond finds the scroll that suggests Helbrand isn't a Southern King after all, so he races to Galadriel. Does he know about Sauron? Then he finds her and they look at some rings, and that's it for the storyline. If he confronts her, it's done off camera. Also in the story, the three witches are after Gandalf. They do appear to be evil, but there are three of them, so in reality they can't be evil, they must be balanced. Meanwhile, Gandalf is alone, so he must be corrupt. Galadriel told me so. They track down Gandalf, and for no reason whatsoever, one of them impersonates Nori Brandyfoot. In universe, why did she do that? The three of them could have just walked up to him. They did that so the writers could give the audience the information that one of them can shapeshift. The witches then hail Gandalf as Lord Sauron, a thing I didn't buy for a second. As the witches try to explain to Gandalf that he's really Sauron, he starts getting unruly, so they knock him out to transport him back to the eastern land of Rhûn. The Harfoots arrive and decide to try and rescue him. They take their eyes off of the women for a moment, and one of them's gone, so they decide to make their move. Nori's mother distracts the remaining two witches by making bird calls, while Nori and Sadok go to untie the restrained Gandalf. As they're untying him, Nori's mother finds the real Gandalf in a bush, and the show reveals that Nori and Sadok are instead untying the leader of the witches. And again, in universe, why did the witches do this? They already had Gandalf restrained and unconscious, so they untie him and tie up their own leader in order to trap whoever is watching them. It makes no sense on any level. It was done purely for the shock reveal. Sadok is then hit in the stomach with a throwing knife. There's then a big fight, and Gandalf just banishes the witches as soon as he starts properly trying, and delivers one of the worst lines in the entire series. So achingly and pathetically on the nose, why show something by actions when you can just have a character declare what their character traits are? Gandalf banishes the witches and says,
He is not Sauron. He is the other. The Star. He is...
I'm good.
But my God, this show certainly wasn't. Sadok then dies of his stomach wound because nobody there has the wit to consider that maybe Gandalf should heal him. The Harfoots made Gandalf heal an apple tree for fuck's sake, and you're just going to watch Sadok slowly bleed out. But to be fair, for the Harfoots, this behaviour is entirely consistent, because the Harfoots are arseholes. Nobody, not one single one of them, suggested that Gandalf should try to heal Sadok, including Sadok. They just sat and watched the sunset and quietly watched him bleed to death. And Nori and Gandalf go on a journey to Rhûn and have a goodbye scene with the rest of the Harfoots, so tedious that it felt like the 90 years it should have taken to make the rings.
Could you make me a cup of tea, please, Stephanie?